Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So today, I thought it'd be a fun idea, considering we're around a third of the way through the NHL season, to look at how the guys that were traded this offseason are performing and kind of regrade every single major trade from the 2024 offseason. So I have 15 trades ready to go, and we're going to grade it from each side, how these teams are doing with some hindsight. Obviously, these trades aren't you can't make massive assumptions because we are only a third of the way through the NHL season. But at this point, I think we can assume how a lot of these are going to end up long term. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. We're going to go through chronological order. Up first, Ryan McDonagh in a 4th round pick to the Tampa Bay Lightning for a 2nd and a 7th round pick. This Tampa Bay and Nashville swap. For Tampa Bay, I'm going to go with a B+ on this. Ryan McDonagh hasn't killed it offensively, but you didn't get him for offense. He has 6 points in 23 games, but he has just yet again been kind of that reliable number 2/number 3. Him and JJ Mosier, who we're going to talk about later, are playing like they're splitting time at around 20 to 21 minutes a night. He's just been solid defensively. And yes, he does get paid $6.75 million, but I think that still he's around worth that for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And he's obviously used to the team. He's used to the system. And as a result, Tampa right now is sitting in a playoff spot. So pretty good on Tampa's end. They get a B+. Nashville Predators, though, I'm going to go with the D+. Yes, they did move up from a 4th round pick to a 2nd round pick, but they used that money to then go out and get Brady Shea, basically, to replace Ryan McDonagh. Ryan McDonagh only has 1 year left at $6.75 million. Perfectly reasonable deal. Now they're locked into Brady Shea for another 6 years after this for $7 million. So when you apply that context, yeah, this was bad. They got probably a worse defenseman and a defenseman that's paid slightly more for much longer. Pretty disastrous for the Nashville Predators, and this isn't the only deal of theirs that we are going to be talking about. Next up, the Jacob Markstrom trade. Jacob Markstrom at only $4.125 million. They retained around $1.8 million for a 1st round pick and Kevin Ball. For the Devils, I'm going to go with a B- on this right now. I think you maybe could go with a B. Markstrom's been pretty meh, hovering around the 900 save percentage. It's definitely an upgrade over Vanacek or Schmid, what they had last year, but he hasn't even been the best goalie on the New Jersey Devils. That has been Jake Allen. So yeah, even though they got some money retained, they did give up a 1st round pick. They're not going to have a 1st round pick to trade at this year's deadline. I wasn't as high on this deal for the New Jersey Devils as others, just because Markstrom has been so volatile. I still gave him like a B+ or an A-. It's still an upgrade, but yeah, I thought people were a little bit too much too high on Jacob Markstrom, knowing what we know about his volatility. And for the Calgary Flames, I'm going to go with an A. I think I gave them an A- in the moment. I really like this for them, considering the fact they were able to move off Markstrom, who after the 2023 season looked absolutely untradeable at 33 years old with 2 to 3 years left at $6 million. Yes, they ate some money on this, but they have the salary cap space to do so. They still have like $15 million in salary cap. They picked up a 1st round pick, and clearly it was time for Dustin Wolf to assume that role as a starter. He's been fantastic for them. He has a .918 save percentage in 13 games. So they were able to pick up an asset for an old guy, and they had a better goalie in the wings to start right now. Great deal for the Calgary Flames. They get an A. You could argue even an A+. I just think that Devils pick might end up being pretty late, but still very good value. For the Calgary Flames, Pierre-Luc Dubois for Darcy Kuemper swap. Up first for the Kings, I'm going to go with the C. Kuemper has an 8.99 in 10 games right now. Dave Riddick has been playing about the same level, but Darcy Kuemper just hasn't really been that good for the LA Kings. It's still a fine deal just because they got out of PLD, obviously had a much longer term. I believe he had 4 years more on his contract than Darcy Kuemper, who still only has another 2 years after this at 5.25. Still a negative asset in Darcy Kuemper. I'm not going to murder them for this. The Capitals, though, I'm going to go with a B, maybe even a B+ for this. PLD still is not an $8.5 million player, but it's clear that they had a plan to pick up a better goalie, a goalie that we're going to get to very shortly, so they need to move out Darcy Kemper's money. PLD, I think, can be a solid $7 to $7.5 million play. That's probably is what he is right around now. He has 16 points in 24 games, playing pretty solid with Connor McMichael and Tom Wilson for most of the season. So yeah, you can't say it's like a home run because again, at the end of the day, PLD still is probably going to be negative value for them. But in the next 2 to 3 years, it's a great deal for them. And the salary cap's only going to continue to rise maybe by the end of that contract when PLD's 31, 32. And if he's still putting up around 60 points, that'll probably be around $8.5 million. So it's not the end of the world for the Capitals. A C for the Kings, a B for the Capitals. The Linus Ullmark trade. Ullmark for Mark Kastelik, Korpisalo in the 25th overall. Up first for the Senators. I'm going to get a lot of shit for this. I'm going to get called a biased Senators fan because they probably are my second or third favorite team. I'm going to go with the B for the Senators. I know Ullmark is playing so bad right now relative to what we expect. He has an 888. That is simply unacceptable. I still believe, given how volatile goaltending is, and the Senators' defense actually has been pretty good around him, it's just him playing lackluster. I think he's going to turn it around. He carried the Boston Bruins to a degree last season, him and Swayman. It was not the Bruins' defensive system. I think Ullmark's going to turn it around. It's really concerning now if they gave him that 4-year deal at $8 million. But I still have faith in Ullmark turning it around. I probably gave the Senators an A in the moment on this deal. So I'm definitely saying it is not aged like you maybe expect it. But I'm still going to go with a B. They didn't need that first overall pick. It was 25th overall. They already had a pretty solid young core. Kastelik, whatever. He was actually pretty solid early on. And Korpisalo has been playing better than Ullmark. But right now, I don't expect that to keep up. I'm going to go with the B, but I'm also going to give a B for the Boston Bruins. They moved off Ullmark, which it made sense at the time, but yeah, considering how Swayman started, they kind of got some shit Swayman's contract negotiations. It's okay. Kastelik is a solid bottom six piece. The first round pick ended up being Dean Latorno, who's struggling at the college level, but he's more so of a long-term project for them. Korpisalo has a 907, which is pretty solid right now, only making $3 million. They got $1 million retained. This actually turned out to be a pretty even deal as of right now. I still think the Senators have the upside to win it because, again, Ullmark's track record, even before he got to Boston and Buffalo, was just so bulletproof. I refuse to believe that he fell off the second that he signed this extension, and now he's just some kind of bad player. So a B for both teams in this trade. The Jake Walman trade. Jake Walman and a second-round pick for future considerations. This is probably going to be the most lopsided out of any trade. Sharks get an A. Jake Walman has been fantastic. 19 points in 22 games. Genuinely has been a top 20 defenseman in the entire NHL solely this season. And he got dumped alongside a second-round pick to get rid of his $3.4 million cap hit. This is one of the worst trades in recent memory. Obviously, it's not going to have massive effects on the landscape of the NHL, but just in terms of value, this has been an absolute disaster for the Red Wings, who are going to get an F, considering the fact instead of maybe packaging a pick to dump a hole, to jump a guy like Chychrun, just dump other guys that were not solid players. I get Walman wasn't that good in the 2023-2024 season, but it's a disaster for the Red Wings, considering they moved off Walman's $3.4 million and basically spent that on Tarasenko, who has been brutal. He's making $4.75 million for them. Disaster for the Detroit Red Wings. A+, F-. Basically consensus. Everybody should probably agree on that, considering how good Walman has been. For the San Jose Sharks, Mangiapane for a second-round pick, Flames and Capitals. Flames, I'm going to go with an A for this. I think this is a very solid deal for them, considering Mangiapane had kind of stalled out after his 35-goal season with back-to-back around 40-ish point seasons, making $5.8 million. The fact they were able to get a second-round pick and kind of commit to their rebuild, retool, although they are still winning games right now. They got to start losing. They got to get that top 10 pick, not going to Montreal. But yeah, this was very good asset management. The fact they were able to get a second-round pick. For the Washington Capitals, I'm going to go with a C+. I don't think Mangiapane has been disastrous. He's actually been a pretty solid defensive player for them thus far, but the point production hasn't really been there. 10 points in 24 games at the time of recording this. At $5.8 million, again, defense, but I'm going to need some more scoring if you're going to get that kind of cap hit. So at least this season, it is kind of negative value. I think they're probably going to re-sign him for a lower cap hit, and then maybe he'll find his offensive game more so. This was the one Capitals move that in the moment I was head scratching what they were doing here, and thus far for a second round pick at that cap hit, it's a little bit concerning, and I think negative value for sure this season. We're going to see how it ages overall, but it's not a disaster in terms of trading a second round pick for an actual roster player, because the Sabres did exactly that when they traded for Beck Malenstyn. They gave up the 43rd overall pick. Sabres get a D on this. Beck Malenstyn is 26 years old. He wasn't some young guy. He has 3 points in 24 games, playing around 9 minutes a night. I understand that the Sabres already had a metric shit ton of prospects and picks, but you could have got a far better player for a second-round pick compared to Beck Malenstyn, who is a fourth liner at this point, and that's basically all he's going to be. Again, maybe he's a speedy guy that you like in your bottom six, but he's nothing special. This was bad asset management by the Buffalo Sabres. For the Washington Capitals, I'm going to give them an A. They moved off a guy that was stuck on their fourth line, bottom six, for a 43rd overall pick, a relatively early second round pick. They selected Cole Hudson. They got Cole Hudson for Beck Malenstyn. I'm not sure Cole Hudson's going to be as good as Laine Hudson, but I think he eventually can be an NHLer. Great by the Washington Capitals. And again, they moved off some money to do some later moves that we're going to talk about further. Utah Hockey Club went all in terms of their defense core when they traded for Mikhail Sergachev from the Tampa Bay Lightning. They traded J.J. Mosier, Connor Geekie, a 2025 second round pick, and a 2024 seventh round pick. I'm going to give Utah a B here. Sergachev has been a very solid number one, maybe a lower end number one, but he's been good for them. He's probably going to put around 50, 55 points. The only problem is he is making $8.5 million. He is on this massive contract, which he is just about worth. You got to pay a premium, and they did pay a decent amount in order to get him. So I think it's fine. I think it's a fine deal for the Utah Hockey Club. You could maybe even convince me it's a B+. Again, you got to pay a decent amount to get a potential number one defenseman. Not sure Sergachev's ever going to regain top 15, top 20 in the entire NHL status, but I think he's safely 22 to 32 in the NHL, roughly, probably actually closer to late 20s, early 30s. But he's a very good defenseman. You got to pay a decent amount to get those in the NHL. Solid deal. And I understand them maybe moving off Geekie, considering they took a Ginla in the first round. They have like an embarrassment of riches in terms of young forwards. But for the Lightning, I think that this is a very good trade. I think I'm going to give them an A- on this. They had to move out some money this offseason to make the moves that they did. J.J. Mosier had a great start with the Tampa Bay Lightning this season. Has slowed down a little bit, but still, with him and Ryan McDonagh have been like kind of their number two, number three. He's not as good as Sergachev, don't get me wrong, but they got a very solid second pair guy in return. Connor Geekie, I still think, is a very good prospect. He's been at the NHL level. He hasn't been killing it, but again, he's a 2022 draftee. The fact that he's solidified himself on that team has been very impressive, on top of getting a 2025 second round pick. And we're going to talk about a guy later when they traded all their picks to get someone. They need some picks like that to potentially make deadline moves or just restock the cupboards. They did not have any U25 guys, so to get a guy like Connor Geekie, this was a very good deal for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Utah also traded for John Marino to bolster their defense core. They gave up 2 second-round picks. Again, I'm going to go with the B for Utah on this. Marino obviously got hurt. He hasn't even played a game for the Utah Hockey Club, so it's kind of hard to judge him. But I think as long as Marino can be a solid second-pair guy for the Utah Hockey Club, he's worth 2 seconds. I'm perfectly fine with giving up that much. As long as he's 2023 John Marino when he was on the Devils instead of maybe 2024. Solid deal for Utah. For the Devils, I'm going to give him a B+ as well in terms of restocking, especially after trading away that first-round pick in the Markstrom deal to restock some of your picks in prospect pool is pretty solid. And when looking at John Marino, although still a good player, New Jersey has so many young defensemen in terms of Hughes, Nemec, Casey, and Salayev that they were going to have them coming up in the next 2 to 3 years. So Marino was kind of a little bit expendable. Instead, they used that money to go out and get a Brendan Dillon that's only going to be on the team for 3 years. Then he's going to be out. I like this move by the New Jersey Devils. They get a B+. I think it was very solid for them. The Los Angeles Kings decided to acquire Tanner Jeannot on day 2 of the NHL draft for a 2025 second-round pick and a 2024 fourth-round pick from the Tampa Bay Lightning. Kings get a D+ on this. Tanner Jeannot has 3 points in 22 games right now, playing only around 11 minutes a night, like slightly, maybe a little bit better than Beck Malenstyn, on top of just having that egregiously dirty hit on Brock Besser that he got suspended for. And he's making $2.66 million. So, he's not, I think Malenstyn's only making 1.3, max 1.3. Jeannot's making solid third line money, and he has been just a brutal fourth liner thus far for them. Maybe I'm not giving him an F because maybe he could turn it around and be an effective bottom sixer, but relative to that cap hit to give up a second and a fourth round pick, he was a genuine negative asset. And for the Tampa Bay Lightning, you got to go with an A. The overall Tanner Jeannot experience in Tampa Bay is still a D-D, considering they gave up a first through fifth for the Nashville Predators to get him, but to get some solid assets and to move off that $2.66 million. Hint, hint, that's kind of how they opened up cap space in order to get a guy like Jake Gensel. Great deal by JBB for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Great asset management. They get an A. Next up, Logan Thompson, the Washington Capitals, yet again, when they got Logan Thompson for 2 third-round picks. For the Capitals, this has to be an A+. They got Logan Thompson, who not only was a solid starter, when he was healthy, a solid starter for the Vegas Golden Knights in his 2 seasons, He's only making $767,000 this season for 2 third-round picks. Right now, he has a 10-1-2 record, has been a massive reason for their success with a .913 save percentage. He's been awesome. He's been a top 10, arguably, goalie in the entire NHL for basically peanuts. They get an A+. That pretty much goes without saying. For Vegas, I'm going to go with the C+. It's kind of tough because he did apparently want a trade. He did ask for a trade. You still definitely should have gotten more than 2 third-round picks. Should have at least gotten like a second and a third-round pick. So it's an underwhelming trade. But at the end of the day, he wanted out. Vegas didn't have a ton of leverage. They had to trade him for something. Washington Capitals, yet again, Jakob Chychrun from the Ottawa Senators to the Washington Capitals for Nick Jensen and a third-round pick. For the Capitals, this gets an A. Jensen was a solid player, but was getting up there in age. They needed to change something up. Jakob Chychrun is clearly a better player and was only making $4.6 million this season. 8 goals, 15 points, 19 games. His underlying numbers are a little bit shaky, but his actual results have been fantastic early on for the Washington Capitals. They might have to give him some kind of massive contract extension. We'll see where that's at. But still, they acquired a top pair guy for an aging second pair guy for the most part in a third-round pick. For the Senators, I'm going to go with the B-. It's definitely a talent downgrade without a doubt, but I understand the logic here from Steve Staios. He wasn't the guy that traded for Jakob Chychrun. He didn't want to give Chychrun some kind of massive extension and be paying Shabbat, Sanderson, and Chychrun around $24 million for their top 3 defensemen. So I get it from that perspective. And Jensen has been solid. He has 9 points in 24 games. He's actually a +11. So he's been solid. He's a natural righty. He plays on the right side. Ottawa obviously needed that because their big 3 was all lefties. Chychrun could play the right side, but wasn't his more so natural position. So as a result, I don't hate this for the Senators, but it's definitely a talent decrease, and a third-round pick isn't really going to move me that much. Maybe if it was a second, they would get a B, but I'm going to go with the B-. As of right now, the New York Rangers tried to plug their first-line right wing with Riley Smith. They traded a 2027 second-round pick in a conditional 5th-round pick for 2025. Rangers get a C+ for this. Riley Smith had a really good start, but in his last 17 games, he has 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. I can't really blame him. Like, he's not the reason why the first line isn't working. Obviously, Zibanejad and Kreider are the main reason, but he hasn't been the solution. He's been okay, but at $3.5 million, given the lack of production, especially of late, it's not been a good deal for the New York Rangers. They get a C+. And for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm going to go with an A-. They gave up, I believe, a 3rd-round pick to get Riley Smith from the Vegas Golden Knights. Then they end up flipping him for a second. Very good asset management. They did have to retain $1.25 million, but Pittsburgh's probably going to stink regardless, and they took on a bunch of bad contracts this most recent summer. So they're clearly retooling. They're clearly heading towards a rebuild. Good on Kyle Dubas to move off Riley Smith instead of trying to convince them that they're actually still a contender and still could make the playoffs. The Montreal Canadiens, the Patrick Laine trade, they got a 2026 second-round pick from Columbus for Jordan Harris. Jackets, I'm going to go with the B- on this. Again, they were in a really tough situation because Laine had basically publicly wanted out for a full year. The locker room, it was not a good presence given the fact that someone that didn't want to be there was just like continuously asking out. So they moved off Laine. They've actually been a pretty good team. They're above 500 without him. Jordan Harris hasn't really been that good, but yeah, it was just good to get him out. B-, whatever. I get in terms of value, like it isn't that negative, but I think just in terms of culture, it was a good move. And for the Montreal Canadiens, they get an A. Laine has played 1 goal. He scored 1 goal against my New York Islanders. I still don't think he's going to be an $8.7 million player this year and next, but they got a second-round pick to take him on. You could argue for an A+ here. He's probably going to re-sign some type of extension that's below 8.7, and then he'll be a core piece of this team. When they're actually trying to win now, the next year or two doesn't really matter his cap hit, considering they're not going to come close to the playoffs. So very good deal. Thought it in the moment. Very good deal for Montreal. I think it's a slightly better deal for Columbus considering their success after moving him out. And then lastly, we got the Yaroslav Askarov trade where he went from Nashville to San Jose. Yaroslav Askarov, Nolan Burke in a 2025 third-round pick to San Jose for Magnus Krona, David Enstrom in a 2025 first-round pick. That is Vegas's. I'm going to go with an A for the San Jose Sharks. You could argue for an A+ considering they got their goalie of the future, a top 3 goalie prospect in hockey. He has a .937 in 10 AHL games right now, as well as a .927 in 2 NHL games. By next season, he'll probably be getting 40-ish games from the San Jose Sharks. It looks like he's going to be an elite starter one day. They did pay a decent amount, so I can't fully go an A+. I'm going to dive into that with the Nashville Predators. But an A. I think an A is definitely fine. For the Predators, I'm going to go with a B+. Hindsight here is a little tough considering the Predators might be heading towards their retool rebuild relatively soon compared to when they made this trade. They thought, we're going to be contending the next 3 to 5 years. We gave Saros this extension. It doesn't make sense to keep Askarov to be the backup. He's obviously very unhappy. So in the moment, I think I gave both teams an A because I do still really like his return for the Predators, but it probably would have been smart to hindsight again 2020 to trade Saros this offseason and roll with Askarov, do the rebuild, retool. And Nashville still could potentially turn it around in the regular season. But yeah, I'm going to go with the B+ because they did get a solid first round pick from Vegas. That could be like 20 to 23rd overall. That definitely has some value. On top of David Enstrom's a very underrated prospect. He went 32nd overall in the 2023 draft. He had 19 points in 44 SHL games last year. Very impressive for a draft year +1. And then this season he has 13 and 20. So he's probably going to be cracking my top 50 prospect pool in like the 35 to 45 range. So they got basically the equivalent of like 2 first round picks for Askarov. Again, Askarov's most likely going to be the best player in this trade, but for the Predators, not the worst return ever. Actually, a pretty solid return, so I'm going to give them a B+. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about these grades? Which trades was I too harsh on? Who was I too light on? And I'll be seeing the next one. Go watch the most recent pod. Peace.